Well, it could be considered down here in Oz that we've lost the fight against Varroa Mite, but I think the fight's just begun. Oh gosh, here we are, into the uncharted waters of the Varroa Mite incursion in Australia. The boys in New South Wales have taken on the challenge and had a good crack at it, but it doesn't look promising. The mites are getting more and more widespread. Now it looks as if we're going to transition into management. Transition! Now there's an interesting word. How long is a transition is my question. And what is it going to look like? There's some beekeepers in the red zone that can still take the extermination option because, of course, it's early days yet and we're not really sure whether they're going to re-release the red zone to be able to have bees or not. So that everybody's got a difference of opinion. The interesting thing that I'm thinking about is I've read a few different articles as to when you lose your bees, say you lose 100 hives, and then are you going to get compensated for all of the years going forward that maybe those bees would have, generated? Because, 100 hives can turn into 1,000 hives in your imagination if you want it to. But, or are we just going to say that you sold out and got your $500 and that was that, and then you did something with that money, either started again or moved on, or I don't know, maybe went and bought some chocolates or whatever you did with it. Who knows? It's going to get really, really interesting, and I'm sure there's going to be some legal cases that'll be worth watching. Luckily for us down here in South Australia, we've got our own mess to deal with. The girls aren't across the river yet, but luckily they can't swim, but from what I can gather, they can fly on the back of a bee. So here it comes, look out. We've had a phone call from young Matt at the radio station at the ABC over in Renmark, which broadcasts around South Australia. And I thought, well, here's a good opportunity to share a bit of bush bee man logic. Or, I don't know. I'm trying not to be too miserable, but I'm not feeling over happy at the minute.
And almost 18 months ago, you first heard about Varroa Mites. They're a bee parasite that, until that point, hadn't been seen in Australia before, so we didn't really know a lot about it. Since then, the race has been on to try and keep ahead of it, but now it seems like it's won, at least in one state anyway. The National Management Group made the decision yesterday that it was no longer technically feasible to eradicate Varroa Mite and had entered a transition to management phase. That's the official word. Mark deCaux is a almond farmer in the Riverland and a beekeeper in Loxton, and also on YouTube as the Bush Bee Man. G'day, Mark.
G'day, Matt. How are you?
Good, thank you. Now, you've been studying this since it sort of started and talking to all sorts of different people, but basics first. What is Varroa Mite and how does it actually affect the bees?
Well, the Varroa Mite is basically a little, I guess, an insect, for want of a better way. And it's kind of like a bee mosquito, but instead of sucking only their blood, it also sucks their fat tissues out of them and reduces their strength and their ability to cope with other incursion. Well, because what happens with the mites, of course, they turn up and they breed in the pupae, and then they'll just keep multiplying, and eventually the bees we have the problem is they don't know what they are yet.
So bees in other places where Varroa Mite have actually sort of developed some sort of immunity or resistance, I suppose, in some ways against it.
Yeah. Well, basically what happens is as the mites move through the bee environment, basically most of the research indicates somewhere between 50 and 70% of the managed hives will be wiped out, and roughly about 95% of the feral hives will be destroyed.
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah. And so the real issue is the wider pollination problem. Now, everybody just thinks about almonds, but of course you've got apples and cherries and tomatoes and I don't know, everything we like to eat that came from Europe looks for a bee.
You need the bees to actually make it happen there. So, yeah. And I suppose, but having a foot in both camps here, like you grow almonds and you also keep bees as well. How do you feel about the decision in New South Wales to move from eradication just into management?
I feel sad for us as big keepers in general, but I don't think there was any other choice, really, ultimately. I think there's a lot of people still waving the flag saying we could have, but I personally think, well, this is a terrible thought, but if the mite had turned up in South Australia and they'd just destroyed the beekeeping industry in South Australia to save it all, that probably would have happened. We would have all been on fire and that would be that. But it turned up in New South Wales, which is basically 2/3 of the bee world, and all the big beekeepers, and they basically are the bee industry. So it couldn't have turned up any worse state, really.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose that was the problem at the time when we were talking about how pollination was going to happen, because there were a lot. I mean, this time of year, I know for you, it's pretty busy. You're normally up early and up late to moving bees around the place. So and getting them across the border was the issue. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, that was the trouble, because of course the bees come from there where they were. Well, they didn't move them out of the red zones where the mites were actually detected, but the problem was they moved them from which were supposed blue zones, which didn't have any mites detected, but when they'd moved them, then the mites were detected where they had been moved from, and then obviously they went to the almonds where they moved to, and they went, hello, they're here as well. That's the thing about these rotten little mites, is that when you test for them, you're testing 300 bees, like you shake some bees out of your brood box, and you catch 300 bees, and then you process them, and if you find some mites, then obviously you do a calculation. Say you've got 100,000 bees, you've got 300 bees, you get 2 mites, you've got quite a lot of mites in your hive.
Yeah, right, got it.
But you might have, so if you've got 10 mites, you might not find any mites when you do your test. Hence why you've got to do it every month, because they go from 10 to 1,000 real quick.
Yeah, very quickly, yeah. You've been as I said, you've been following this along pretty closely since the start, and talking to a lot of different people, particularly recently. What are they saying about the Varroa Mite coming to Australia?
Well, it's interesting. The American fellow beekeepers that I've talked to and travel along, because we have a bit of a following over there, they basically, when it first started, they said their opinion was, either you've got to just put a big fence up around the whole area and set fire to every bee that you possibly can. But then they also made the point that if it's been there, the real problem was it had been there longer than when we found. And so it would have been probably in the actual feral environment, and there's no way to kill them, because if they're in the national forests, and they're in all the gum trees,
they're not going to be detected there.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, I doubt very much that the government's going to sanction Agent Orange over the national forest.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure to get rid of them. Yeah. So then that falls back on beekeepers like yourself to actually test and make sure that you haven't got them in there.
Yeah, that's right. And that's basically what happened. And eventually they got found, and obviously as you test and.
Okay, so how big of a problem is this?
Well, I think it's huge. The problem is it's probably they're calling it transition, but this is my thought too. My thinking is the next 5 years is the mess. Because what happens in the next 5 years is we're not used to managing it for a start. And the statistics say that roughly half of the smaller operators will go out of business. Like, they will not be bothered because it's too hard. And then roughly 20 to 30% of the bigger businesses will basically go broke because they can't afford to keep managing. Like, because your labour costs go from, I don't know, instead of having to check your hives twice a year, you got to check them every month.
But other countries have been dealing with this already, so surely we can look to them for some advice on what to do from here
absolutely. Yeah. No, well, at least we're late to the party. That's a good thing. Yeah. So we definitely don't have to make all the mistakes that have been made in other countries. And I think, so it won't be as bad in some respects, but it'll just be the transition, little window. Maybe it'll only be 2 or 3 years until we get on top of it.
And we should make the point as well that South Australia doesn't have any detections at the moment. Is that right?
Not at this point.
Right. Okay. But it's pretty close.
Well, it was just over the other side of the river, so it was just in the riverina, and when the pollination was on. And I think it's just a matter of time. Maybe we'll get another year, maybe 2. I don't know. I mean, statistically, if you look at every other nation that it's happened in, it's usually a fairly rapid expansion.
For sure. All right. Mark, great to chat, and thanks for coming in this morning and talking about it, and hopefully we do have that couple of years.
I don't know. Usually the bush bee man's all cheerful and happy and carrying on, but I'm not feeling most that cheerful about all of this situation. I've been in a holding pattern now for about a year and a bit since the Varroas turned up on our shores. I think what I have to do is figure out a way to have the girls in smaller sites, say probably 20 in a drop. Seems to be a bit of good advice. Only trouble is, here in South Australia, that could get really interesting to find enough sites. I have enough trouble finding sites already, never mind trying to find a drop for 20. I guess, though, you won't need as much to forage on if you've only got that many colonies in one spot. Honestly, to be absolutely, completely honest, I don't know what the future's going to look like. What I do know is that somehow, somewhere, we're going to have some bees, and if you hang around, you'll work out how to manage them. That's what I reckon. So as we go into this brave new world of the mite incursion, it might be a good time to pop up when you're down at your local market. Don't forget to give the local beekeeper a smile and buy a jar of his honey. Or heck, you can always go on our website and buy some of our honey. We could do with a bit of a pat on the back as well for having a crack. Ah, lordy, I don't know. I'm thinking, might be good, might be shit. I'm pretty sure it's tipping towards shit at the minute, but ultimately, bees will rule out and beekeepers will survive because we're a gnarly bunch of assholes. And if I haven't actually repeated myself enough times, don't forget, if you're enjoying the show, click like, subscribe, share it with your friends. Heck, let's just grow beekeepers and the love of the whole exercise. Be there or be square.